All right. So, guys, look, thank you for giving up a good chunk of your time to come and be part of one of our Tech Curious series. I think that the subject we're going to talk about, I think, is really interesting. And I think as time goes on, it's going to be something that is going to play more and more of a part in businesses of all sizes and scales across the UK and globally as well, I think. So look, I'll let you both introduce yourself and maybe just give us a bit of an insight into sort of the topic you're wanting to talk about. And if you could talk us a little bit, just a bit of a synopsis on Accordant, that would be brilliant. So I'll hand over to you two. And Dave, do you want to go first?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Carl. I'm Dave Fardoe. I'm one of the original founders of Accordant Solutions. We founded Accordant Solutions back in 2013, and we specialize in three main areas, one of which is transformation economics, and that brings us into the subject we're going to talk about today, which is social and climate value. The other areas being service delivery and cybersecurity. And I'm here with my colleague today, Phil, so I'll hand over to Phil and let him talk about himself and cybersecurity.
Cool. So thank you very much, Dave, and thanks, Carl, for having us. I know, Carl, we probably go back to when we were both in single-digit ages, having grown up on the same street over in just in North Bristol. So so I'm Phil Hyde. I've been with Accordant as a director for nearly 2 years now, heading up the cybersecurity practice, where we basically help clients of all sizes, and cybersecurity is important for the small outfits down the road from us and the large global enterprise companies with cybersecurity, and that ranges from securing handsets and making sure that the data on the phones are safe to the big networks in data centers and in the cloud, and everything in between. We help customers with that, and it's a fast-paced environment. I think cybersecurity, and it's ever changing. So when we add the social value element to it as well, I think the actual impacts of it as well are really interesting. So we'll cover that more off in this session. So yeah, thank you.
Good. Thanks for the introductions. And I think the subject that you guys spoke about before we recorded this around sort of social value and sort of climate value, I think are really interesting areas. And I think, look, we all kind of get what sort of financial value is, as we said earlier, sort of the total cost of ownership and return on investment. But I guess, in your opinion, what is climate value and social value?
Yeah, sure. I mean, social value is a really wide subject, and it covers a whole range of things. And I guess we kind of intuitively get what climate value is. So we talk about carbon footprint, carbon emissions. We understand the climate change. We understand plastic pollution, kind of intuitively. But social value is something different. What actually is that, and what does it include? So it's things like health and well-being and mental health. It's also things like diversity and inclusivity. It's also about job creation, skills creation, benefits to the community, improving security within an area. And really what we look at is how can organizations influence those kind of things in their IT spend. So, for example, you might be having somebody who's moving to a cloud solution. How is that going to affect the jobs, the roles, the skills that they need? How is that going to affect the wider community? Or they may be looking at something like a technology refresh, so a firewall refresh or something of that nature. So when they're making those choices and making those decisions, it's not just about the money side of things. It's not just about the financial, either the total cost of ownership or the ROI. For example, in firewall refreshes, you might be looking at companies who are recycling or re-engineering their products. Some companies out there have 85% of their product is re-engineered, reused, recycled. So that has a climate impact. Some of those technologies are next generation, as Phil could talk to, around they use machine learning and artificial intelligence to cut down on the number of alerts and things that people have to sit and sift through. So your job is less stressful, it's easier to do, it's more accurate, it's more efficient. That leads to health benefits. All of those things can be measured and can be quantified and related back to the social value that is within the company, for the employees, but also for their families, for the wider community, for the greater number of stakeholders. And what we've found over the last few years, Carl, is that more and more companies are getting into this. More and more companies are now compelled to report on social value. So the Social Value Act in 2012 made it obligatory for people to look at social value. And in January 2021, they were compelled, certainly in public sector, to report on it. What is the wider social value and impact of what you're doing. So we group all these things together. We look at the financial side, the typical classic ROI. We look at the social value side, what's the benefit to the wider stakeholders in the community, and also the carbon. What is the carbon impact and the carbon footprint of what you're doing and how you're doing it? And we bring all of those things together into a sort of single pane of glass and report that back to our clients.
And I kind of get sort of, and this might be a really sort of ignorant statement to make, both of you guys, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it. If you're Google, AWS, Facebook, Amazon, this stuff is brilliant. Do you know what I mean? And you've probably got teams of people looking at all of this. And as a big, I mean, even if you're not one of those companies, but a big sort of listed business, clearly this is something that's going to be on your agenda. But SME businesses, sort of 100 million turnover, 50 million turnover, how are they going to have time? How do they do it? How do they make it work? Because there's a million things that people need to be looking at. And I guess whilst it's great, social value and climate value are two clearly very important subjects, especially over the last sort of 18 months we've all been through, they're probably not featuring hugely highly on some of those businesses' radar. So what does it mean for those types of organisations, and how can they prioritise that, and sort of how do they get the most out of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. The complexity is out there. It's, like I said, a broad subject. There's about, by last count, 120 different methodologies to calculating social value. There's about 4 or 5 different standards you can go for. So the great question is, where do you start? What do you actually pick? And what we tend to do is we try to template different kinds of businesses, different verticals, if you like. So public, private, social, third sector, voluntary, those kind of things. And we say, just start on the journey, just pick a few things and start on the journey. Start to ask the questions and look at what data you have and how you can measure that data, and talk to people who can help you interpret it and put it out there in such a way that it's meaningful. There is a number of principles, there's 7 principles. One of which is, don't overclaim. Another one is be transparent. So you hear terms like greenwashing out there and people reporting on things that are climate issues. The reality is I don't particularly like the term greenwashing because it tends to put people off. Just get a start, pick some things that are important to you, to your stakeholders, to your employees, ask them the question, what's important to you guys, and start to measure and manage those things and report them back. But also, I guess, we'll no doubt come back to this at some other point. When you're looking about new employees and, attracting people and retaining people, what are important to those kind of people? Who are you trying to attract into your business? What do they want to see? Salaries used to be important on everyone's agenda, but actually salaries are now, 3rd or 4th on the list? People want to know about, what do I do for my community? What am I doing in my charitable, days and all sorts of things? So we can build a smallish framework, a small template, and start with those. And we have a set of methodologies in our software that allow us to calculate social value, calculate carbon footprint, look at the mitigations you can do, and then we say we wrap it all up into a single pane of glass.
That makes sense. And I suppose for people that are sort of thinking about this and wanting, and you should maybe pick a couple of points to sort of start with, I guess, from your experience, and what are some of those common starting points or places or blocks that you tend to see a lot of organizations sort of looking at? I guess where can they pick maybe some of those easy wins or low hanging fruit to start getting some momentum relatively quickly?
Yeah. So if you take IT as a typical a place where we're starting, that's where we work. You look at a data center. Data centers are going to consume huge amounts of electricity. They've got a lot of cooling requirements, and they're big investments. So you might be moving to a cloud. So one of the questions you could ask is to your cloud providers or the people who are potentially bidding, what is your social and climate sort of value? How do you do it? Do you source all of your energy from renewable or green sources? What do you do with that heat? Do you use it to heat the rest of your building or your infrastructure? How do you invest in the local community? What sort of, you've created jobs, you've created wealth by having that data center there. What do you do to spread that around a bit and introduce the idea of prosperity in the community rather than profit for shareholders? business is business. Yeah, we all have to make a profit. That's why we're in business generally. But you can go a bit further than that to spread that prosperity out to a wider community. So what are you doing, and how do you report it? But that's just one example. You know, there are so many different ways that social value can be calculated. So many different things people can do. But that's an easy win from an IT perspective.
Makes sense. And I guess kind of thinking about it, and again, you can kind of see, or maybe even a lot of people can see, kind of how IT can influence, if you'd like, sort of the climate value parts through some of the examples you mentioned there. From everyone knows these data centers, the big power zone are huge, big, sprawling places that have to be kept pretty cool. And some of the ones in some areas you can imagine use probably a lot of power. So you can kind of get how, from sort of like I said, a climate value space, kind of tech plays into it. But I suppose, how can kind of IT influence that social value part? Because I suppose that's probably the harder bit for people to kind of understand. And I guess, how is it related, and how does that? What would your opinions on that and advice be around that?
Yeah, I think it's I mean, it's something maybe Phil can talk about in a bit more detail shortly. You think about cybersecurity. You know, it's one of our key topic areas. So cybersecurity, you think that can't be related to social value, right? It's you know, how do you connect that? But when you think about it, if you take the point of view of your personal information, your banking details, your credit card transactions, those kind of things, if an organization is going to, you know, not protect that information properly, and that information gets lost, whether it gets used or not, the idea of it being lost is going to cause you and other people in the company some stress. But you as an individual, you're going to be stressed about it. Your family's going to be stressed about it. What details are out there? What can be done with that information? And you know, your identity could be stolen, and all sorts of things can happen there. So the IT teams who have the responsibility for cybersecurity, they don't just have a responsibility internally, because they also have a job to do about thinking, what are the consequences if I lose that information to our clients, to our end consumers? It's going to impact them, their health, their well-being, their mental welfare, all those sort of things, let alone, you know, their relationships and their peer relationships and everything else. So something seemingly unrelated, like cybersecurity, actually does have a social impact and can have, therefore, a social value if you get it right. So you think about IT as a broader thing: service delivery, accessibility, communications. That's all important in social value. But also, it's a technology, it's a science and technology, it's a STEM subject. So diversity, inclusivity, all of those things, bringing people into the industry and upskilling them and training them, they're all factors in social value that the IT teams and the IT departments should be bearing in mind, and they're making decisions and taking technologies forward.
And if you just to expand on, you know, one of those points, Dave, about cybersecurity, and you know, if you look at any organization, it might be a large, you know, 500 seat, 1,000 seat, they might have someone in charge of security. It could be a CISO if they're big enough. It could be a virtual CISO. They'll be responsible for, you know, securing the data internally, but also for maybe protecting the reputation of the company from a security perspective. So if you look at, like, you know, a company launches a web service or a web, you know, something on the internet which is accessible to customers and gets attacked, and it affects the availability of that service is down, then what's the impacts on that? And then, you know, it comes down to simple things. Well, if something's offline, then there's penalty fees, because they're not going to be maintaining their SLAs and operating level agreements. So they're going to be paying penalties back to the customer. They could be paying penalties to some kind of governing body. So that's going to be a financial hit. Then it could be a user, could be a customer out in the world, could be an internal staff user who cannot access that, may need that service to do their job or to fulfill something personal. And if they can't do that, what are the impacts? You know, that could have a mental impact. It could cause a spiral in an all sorts of domino effect way. So when you look about reporting, you know, a cybersecurity incident has to be reported. You know, it has to, you know, if you were, for example, a people talent and suffered a cyber attack, you probably call the folks up at GCHQ to have a chat with them and say what's going on, and then that you'd have to report that. So all these elements about how you secure your data, but also how it's visible, it's that key messaging as well.
And Dave, one of the going back, you kind of an interesting point, sort of around sort of how using things like ML and AI can kind of add that social value to allowing people more time and making sort of things less stressful. But I suppose can that sort of end up going the other way from a social value perspective? Because there's some interesting things out there if you dig deep enough on the internet where it kind of talks about things like AI and ML almost then sort of almost taking things further away from what humans are doing, and will there be the need for lower skilled workers, and then sort of how is that going to impact sort of on society? So I guess I'd just be keen sort of your view on that social value, but almost taking it sort of the other way, and I don't know what you're seeing and sort of what your opinions are on that.
Yeah, I think I'd probably have to answer that in two parts, to be fair. The idea of automation and AI has been around for many years, decades. And it's always, we're going to replace humans with robots and so on and so forth. We're kind of not there yet. We've been doing this for sort of, 30, 40, 50 years, and we're not there yet. And that's because there's a kind of a leapfrog effect, isn't there? As the technology evolves, it might replace one job, but then somebody finds another way of doing something clever, and we innovate constantly. And I think one of the things that we need to embrace as a species is that we're always going to be evolving. We're always going to be moving the ball forward. And what we need to do is use technology in a way to, we've got a choice. We can either make life, smarter, or we can make life easier, kind of thing. So if we're making our lives easier, we're always going to be innovating moving forward. So if I'm looking at a large enterprise organization and they're getting 3, 4, 5,000, attacks a week, say, some of them get, numbers like that on a daily basis, but let's say they're doing it in a week. I could have a team of people going through all of those alerts, looking for patterns, looking for information, looking for vulnerabilities. Or I could use some machine learning, or I could use some AI to actually spot those patterns. And then I can flag that up to the team so they can actually get involved, figure out if it's a real threat, and then do something about it. So it's not about reducing the size of the team, it's making that team more efficient in addressing that threat and dealing with it, rather than reducing the number of people, if you see what I mean. And I think that's where automation and AI is going to come to its, its natural place to be. It's not about replacing people at the end of the day. You still need to interpret, you still need to understand, you still need the skills. Mark one eyeball on something, if you like. We're not going to get rid of that.
And not to quote a Hollywood film about taking over the world with machines, but it's when it comes, if you to think about humans, one person might say, well, it's in our nature to destroy ourselves, right? So if we think about the decisions we make on how we automate, a security device, or how we automate our IT, with the next generation approach, it's more about working smarter and giving us more opportunities to develop ourselves. So, if we're embracing the digital age and embracing, next generation technologies, they'll take care of all of the stuff and, keeping systems up to date and tuned and operating in the right way. And that then gives staff time to develop themselves, because it's all about freeing up time and giving us some time back to us, so we're not so stressed and our mental well-being increases, and, we're almost becoming in a better mood, and our mind frames are going to be in a better place because we're forward thinking. And when we're spending time in training, that's one of the areas, one of the use cases we see for automation, especially, not replacing ourselves with armies of robots.
It's interesting point you mentioned, the sort of the core, like the Google and the Amazons of people of this world. They're investing a lot of time and thought on, how we operate as human beings. How do we think? Getting into these theta states and things like that. So we're in creativity and we're in innovation mode, if you like. So that's where technology can really help. If we're not spending all our time trawling through reams and reams of data trying to find things, and we're just focusing on a particular problem in a learning and a solution kind of idea, we can easier get into theta state. So we can start to be more innovative. We can start to be creative in the way we solve problems. We can use those social interactions and social skills to get around things and drive more efficiency for our business, for ourselves, which is great because we're all stakeholders in many businesses. So they're investing a lot in that, and to try and get us into those environments where we work smarter and we work more creativity. I think they call it rivers of thinking. So get us out of the traditional rivers of thinking and start to do things a different way. So, that's where it's going to come to fruition.
No, makes absolute sense. And I suppose then, I mean, listening to you has kind of opened my eyes up into sort of what those two areas mean, not so obviously, but I guess all of the fringe benefits back into a business and an organisation and what that can offer. But I guess what would be really interesting, I mean, some of the clients you're working with that are probably sort of further down the road than others in this space. I guess, are you able maybe to share just some of the success stories that they've had and by sort of looking at these things and what that's then allowed them to go on and do as organisations?
Yeah, so think about some of the supply chain. So the supply chain is a good example. We're looking at some of the organisations that we work with. They will transform their IT infrastructure. So that's why we call it transformation economics. In the sense of they may then save huge sums of money. I'm trying to not mention names here, but they'll save a large sum of money, and they won't be spending it on operating their data centers, operating their IT systems. A lot of savings are on BAU because it's more efficient technology, lower power consumption, lower heating, cooling, all of those sort of things that you'd expect, greater performance per dollar. That money can then be taken and invested in what they do as a core business. So if, for example, that core business is providing accommodation or providing housing in a community, then they can invest that in the quality of the build. And then the quality of the build has two effects. First of all, you can put more lighting in the environment. You can put more into the community, more open spaces, different housing structures. So you're increasing well-being and you're increasing mental health. You're improving security in an area. You're also sort of looking at more environmentally friendly materials. So you're looking at longer lifespans for the buildings before they need to be refurbished or regenerated, that sort of thing. You're looking at better insulation. You're looking at wide spaces where people can meet and gather. You're looking at retail services. So all of those things come from a savings in your IT. And again, it's one of those things where organizations need to look at things holistically. And this particular organization I'm thinking of did exactly that and didn't think about it in stovepipes. This is my IT budget, that's where it stays. This is my housing budget, that's where it stays. They looked holistically and said, well, if we save that money there, we can go and spend it over here. And invest it in the community. So that's a real world example, and there's a couple of those out there now where people have spent lots of money in improving, putting a gym in your office block, getting people to go to the gym, reduces BMI, reduces calls to the GP. That saves the GP time and money, and we know that one GP visit is 37 quid a visit. 9 minutes in time, by the way, that's all you get, but it's 37 quid a go. So that has a quantifiable benefit in the community by an organisation saying, we'll save this money here and we'll put a gymnasium in the basement or whatever.
Sounds good and makes absolute sense. And I suppose that's all boils down to, doesn't it? I guess the social value element of the benefits that can have through the transformation economics, which is pretty cool. And I guess as well, kind of winding back, Dave and Phil, so one of the things you kind of mentioned right at the start was, and it kind of ties in, I guess, to what we do as a recruitment firm, but sort of salaries aren't the most important things for people anymore. And we saw kind of the stats coming out yesterday sort of around the amount of jobs that are out there in the UK at the moment. And I mean, we're seeing it specifically in the IT world. I mean, there are more jobs than there are candidates out there at the moment. So organisations need to be thinking a lot more around what they offer people. And so I guess I'd be keen to kind of just maybe understand sort of maybe some examples without naming names, and your opinions as well around sort of how that can tie into both sort of attracting but also then retaining top talent. Because I think that's one of the big challenges for businesses as well, is they may have some great people on their books, but we all know that they're probably getting tapped on the shoulder on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at what used to keep people in jobs, it was money, and to its career prospects. But I think certainly career prospects as you go through the years stays still quite high, but the salary expectations start to come down, and you have this gap, right? I think the biggest things really are, related to social value are, does the company provide, charitable days? So some companies now that you will come across, offer 4 or 5 days a year for doing charity work. And that's a contribution back into the community and charity. Do they embrace, the flexible working? Because, people, especially in the COVID world, can't be expected to go into an office, which, if you were to go through all the procedures and everything else and testing, it creates a lot of stress. So that flexible working and working at home where, you can then support your family at the same time is going to be quite a key one. I think, and the other one as well is tying in, the carbon offset targets. It's supporting and almost encouraging, cycle to work schemes. Because it's not also improving the benefit and the fitness and the mental well-being of the the potential employee and the staff. It's also helping the company when they come to report any social value impacts that their staff are using less fuels to travel into the office and stuff. So I think all of those are going to be pretty key into what fits at the top now, and then is when people become more conscious about that, those list of requirements, it then almost sets what that social value of the company is. So I think that ties back to you, Carl, and your organization. When you come to place or trying to look for candidates for a role, when that candidate looks at the company, they're going to be thinking about what their requirements are, and then does that company actually have a good social value? Is the supply chain between them through you to the potential employer, is that social value baked into that supply chain process as well? So, does the electric you use to have these calls, is that fueled by, solar panels on your roof, or is it, fueled by a diesel generator in the back in the car park? So it's just some elements as to how it all sort of ties in together. Dave, what you think, Dave?
Yeah, it's really interesting. There are a number of surveys out there, and some of the numbers are quite interesting. So if you look at the technology recruitment in some companies, some of the large companies, they went around their most recent recruits and said, what made you come to this company? What was important to you? And 78% said the company culture and its social value and its climate value. That is a huge proportion of people who come to an organization saying, what did you look at first? Was it salary? No, I looked at the social value. I looked at the community investment. I looked at the green credentials. And then I decided, yeah, this is a company that I'm prepared to work for. And that goes for retention as well. The retention figure was sort of 60-70% because of the culture of the organization. And the other thing to bear in mind with that is if you look at the investment houses, so the guys who are putting in money behind a lot of startups, some of those are weighting social value up to 30%, 35%. So if you're a startup or something, or a small organization, an SME who's looking to get funding and backing, and you haven't considered your social impact and your climate impact, chances are you're going to have some difficult questions to answer, because they're going to say, well, 30% of this weighting is on social and climate, and 30% is a big number, in terms of making a decision. So this is something you look at a lot of organizations now to find out about it. Look at things like ESG, environmental social governance. That's the terminology that's used for a lot of this now. That goes back to what they used to call corporate social responsibility. So these things have been around for a while. There's a bit of maturity in some of it. But what we're finding is, since the Social Value Act for public sector, councils, local authorities, public bodies have got to do this stuff. They don't have a choice in it. But private businesses now, PLCs, have got to do it, and more companies are having to get into that same space, and it's rolling down the organization size as well. So your SMEs and everything are also having to do it. And like I say, it's about getting us started, it's about finding that template that works for your organization and starting on the journey. But from a recruitment point of view and a retention point of view, it's big numbers, 70% plus.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we see it with a lot of sort of candidates and we speak with. It's not just, well, how much is it paying, Carly? It's okay. Talk us through the company. What are their values, their views? What else do they do apart from the usual. And I think sort of that employer brand part, the more companies that can kind of understand how they can sort of look at sort of climate and social value, but also then how they can sort of build that and bake that into their employer brand, their culture, is going to be sort of the difference for them, sort of attracting sort of maybe some of that talent that they may be missing out on, and also, as we said, sort of retaining that. And the way the talent market here is in the UK and probably across Europe and the US, it's going to play an ever more important part to be able to keep building your organisation. So I think it's a really important topic, and I think it's good to be talking about it, because I don't think probably as many people are as they probably should be really at the moment in time.
It's also about your supply chain. I mean, people always forget the supply chain, but things that are, you know, of value in social terms there is, what are your T's and C's? What are your terms and conditions? You know, do you pay your suppliers on terms that will allow them to survive and thrive, or are you put such onerous terms on them that they're going to be under pressure? You know, we hear stories in the industry around, you know, 90, 120-day payment terms. That's just unrealistic for most SMEs, you know. So are your terms and conditions geared to actually create social value in your supply chain or not? You know, so it's wider. It's a very wide subject.
Definitely. And I suppose then for somebody who's kind of watching and listening to this, and maybe someone who started to sort of think about this a little bit themselves, and I suppose a bit of a shameless plug, but I guess sort of why Accordant, what can you guys do to help them? And I suppose what does that journey sort of look like for somebody right at the start?
Yeah, so yeah, I'll take the shameless plug, shall I? So our background has always been around the transformation economics. So we're very, very skilled at delivering the business cases and the financial justifications for what people want to do in IT. That's where we have built a lot of experience and capability. We've extended that capability now with our software and our tool sets that we've developed over the last couple of years into the social and the carbon space. So rather than just looking at a project or a set of activities from a financial return point of view, we're now able to sort of take the whole thing into both the social, the carbon, the financial, and give that project that whole holistic view. That's where we've got a real strength. And the other strength that we bring to it is, you know, where do you start? You know, how do you get onto this journey? So we've spent time working with clients to develop templates and models that allow us to say, if you've done nothing in this before, that's okay. We can pick this starting point and we can develop those measurements, those metrics. A lot of people talk about TOMs, themes, outcomes, and measures. So we can give you a subset of those. So we can get you started on it, and we can then help you build that capability, enhance that reporting and development going forward. So a lot of our clients are coming to us saying, we really, really want to do this. We don't know where to start. Can you help us? And we'll get them on that journey. So that's really good.
Perfect. That sounds good. And Phil, anything else to add on that from your perspective, or anything else from sort of the director of the cybersecurity practice you want to kind of get in there?
I think that, you know, also, as well as having the transformation economics background, we've also got the awareness of all parts of IT and cybersecurity. I mean, IT, cybersecurity go hand in hand, but it's also cybersecurity and social value go hand in hand in the same way that IT and social value go hand in hand. So it's all part of the same mesh, if you like. And you know, a lot of companies at the moment don't think about the link, especially between cybersecurity and social value. But as we go forward, is in a world where we're growing more conscious about how we do things, the impacts we're making from putting in a firewall to migrating to the cloud to, you know, anything we do, you know, we understand that. So if a company's looking to actually, you know, become more aware about the success of their cybersecurity and IT based on social value, then that's where we're in a key area to help, you know, being ahead of the curve with it.
Sounds good. Brilliant. All right. Well, look, guys, thank you very much for your time. I think it's been really interesting, and I think we'll probably get some great feedback from people watching this, and it'll be good to see people's opinions and views on what they're doing, what they have done, haven't done, and whether this is something they're gonna take up. Because like I said, I think if only just from sort of a recruitment and talent perspective, I think there's some brilliant wins lots of companies can go and take from this to kind of put themselves ahead of probably some of their competition. So look, really, really appreciate that, guys. I think it's been brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Cheers.